Welcome, guys, to the first breakout session here for Winter Conference 2023. My name is Doug Wiegand, and Aaron Herman and I are going to be talking about nutrient management. You see, the title says, "Why Adjust Nutrient Management?" I'm 51, grew up on a farm in central Illinois here, about 20 minutes away, and we're in our fourth generation on that farm. And if you come onto that farm, we're pretty conservative. Some might call us tight, right? Most would call us stubborn. And I think we pretty well fit the average farmer. But if you come onto our farm and you say, you need to buy this fertilizer, or you need to buy this equipment, because everybody's doing it, because it yields 5 bushel, because it gives you 10 bushel. You see, that really doesn't grab my attention. How many of you jump every time you hear something drives 3 bushel? Right? You see, I don't care what the big data says. I want to understand why. I want to understand what is the economic return to my pocketbook. If I spend $1, is it going to return 2? Right? It's not about brand. It's not about product. It's not about processes. It's about net return on investment. So as we look at that, we're going to dive into nutrient management here at Precision Planting. And Corey Mulbauer, Aaron Herman, and Jason Webster, as well as the R&D team, and a lot of region managers and dealers all over the country have done a lot of research in the last multiple years. Since 2015, I grew up in an ag retail business. The family owned a few miles away from here, and we did 20 years worth of starter research. Clear back in the 80s, early 80s, late 70s. In 2015, there's 4 pictures here of guys standing in the middle of a plot, and there's obviously taller, more mature, darker corn next to some a little bit shorter. And all of these plots, both treatments had the same fertilizers applied and the same amount of fertilizer applied. Same volume, same units of N, P, and K on both sides of this. The difference was how it was managed. And so 2000, and every year it showed the same treatment that was taller last year, more mature, looked more robust. It looked like it was going to be better yield. Was the same treatment that was that way the year before. And so even when we look at those plots and we go back, this year we might say, man, fertilizers, has it gotten cheaper? No, it's still high, isn't it? We might say, maybe this is the year that we cut phosphorus and potassium, the P and the K, and let's just put nitrogen only on. You see, they tried that in this plot. And you can see on the right-hand side of that plot, there was fall broadcast, where they just build the soil bank to feed the crop. And on the left-hand side, they had in-season planter banded phosphorus, potassium, and nitrogen. Which one would you take? Look at the consistency on the banded nutrients in season on the left-hand side compared to the middle or the right. But pictures are pretty, but that doesn't necessarily tell us the economic ROI, right? That's really what we're after. So in this research from 2015 through 22, 8 years worth of research now, there was a comparison of broadcast nutrients compared to split application, where they would cut back some of that broadcast and they would reallocate that and they'd split apply and band some with the planter. It was multi-year, and we're going to focus on, in my discussion here, we're going to focus on phosphorus. So in that multi-year, 8 years worth of research, the broadcast plus planter banded phosphorus at 8 to 10 gallon was the winner. And it wasn't a gross return of $34 per acre. It was a net return. So if I'm a farmer and I'm farming 500 acres of corn, for this example, that's $17,000 net per year. Now you got my attention on the 4th generation Wiegand farm. Now I'm going to pay attention. I need to pay attention here because this might be a better way. And the best treatment that was applied through all those plots that won that was through the FurrowJet that our research and development team designed to place phosphorus. That was a tool, that was a nutrient that tool was designed for. And you can see the plant's got three little bands of phosphorus there, the bottom and on each side. And the question is, why is this better? If this wins every time, every year, every treatment across the board on average, why? So we're going to dive into that a little bit. You see, I'm a difficult person, you know. I always want to know why. Well, why is that? You know, it's like the 2-year-old or the 3-year-old that they just want to keep asking why. Well, why? Right? So we got to look at healthy soil. When we start with healthy soil, half of that is solid. You see, when we go out in the field, we don't think of it as only half being solid, do we? And that solid part consists of mineral matter and organic matter. Mineral matter is the sand, the silt, the clay. The organic matter, we've got a chart, we'll show a little the breakup of that. The other half of that healthy soil is pore space. See, healthy soil has aggregate structure that microbes and roots and humus in the soil help to build aggregate structure, a glue-like substance that binds little microscopic particles together and develops what they call PEDs, and that develops pore space within that soil structure. Half of that pore space, ideally we want it to be moisture, water. The other half of that pore space, ideally, we want it to be air. Okay? You see, the reason that's healthy is because what we're going to try to do in that soil is we're going to try to germinate seed. We want active, robust root growth within that soil structure. We want strong microbial activity. You see, all three of these have to have oxygen to grow and to survive and to flourish. And they have to have moisture. If you cut either one of those away or both, they're not gonna do very well, right? So that's the optimal environment for what we're trying to do. Now, as we look at the organic matter, let's dive into that. And up to 5% of the organic matter in your field is living organisms. Or maybe I'll say organic material, organic matter, either way. Up to 10% is fresh residue. 33 to 50% is decomposing residue. That decomposing residue might be 5 years old. It's not quite done yet, right? Some of it, if it's down a foot and it doesn't have oxygen, it's going to sit there longer, isn't it? Because the microbes that break it down have to have oxygen. So the deeper, the more preserved it's going to be. And then the rest of that organic matter is humus. It's stabilized organic matter. Humus is, once it becomes in the humus form, it's now resistant to decomposition. It darkens the soil in color. It's got great water holding capacity, and it helps in the building soil structure. Why is organic matter so important? Because organic matter, for each 1% of organic matter in the soil, each year mineralization will release 20 to 30 pounds of nitrogen. 4 to 7 pounds of P2O5, the soluble phosphorus that the plant likes to take up or can take up, and 2 to 3 pounds of sulfur. So organic matter is a pretty valuable part of that whole chart, isn't it? It's the part that's going to help feed that plant with what we do as well, right? We're going to feed the plant, and the soil is going to feed the plant. How's it going to feed the plant? Through soil microorganisms. If I take that soil, I put it under a microscope, you're going to see the soil particles, the sand, the silt, the clay, the organic matter, but you're also going to see microbes, the bacteria and the fungi in the soil. 80 to 90% of phosphorus uptake by the plant is made available by the soil microbes. That's an important part of you and I understanding why split applying and banding returns. We have to understand the science, the environment. Once we do, we're going to work with it instead of against it. Now, one key factor is this is temperature driven. So here's a study from University of Nebraska that they did on the effects of soil temperature on the relative availability of phosphorus. You can see on the right-hand chart, with 55-degree soil temperatures, only 30% of that cycle is churning phosphorus solubilized into the soil. The rest of it's tied up. It's not available. And even if you just raise from 55 to 61, just 6 degrees, it jumps to 50%. You go another 3 degrees, just 3 degrees, it opens up another 20%. See, phosphorus isn't readily available. This cycle doesn't really happen until soil temperatures hit about 65 degrees. So we're going to put seed in the soil at 50, right? None of us will break that rule. Well, it's going to be 50 tomorrow, so we'll go ahead and plant today, right? It's going to be 38 tonight, but it'll be 57 tomorrow at noon, right? We'll put seed in the soil. But understand, when we put that seed out there, how's it going to survive? How's it going to bring in phosphorus? See, when I look at microorganisms, we look at this teaspoon of soil, and they claim there's more microorganisms in that teaspoon of soil than people on earth. Now, I don't know who counted that, but I can promise you it wasn't me. But that's what the books say, right? And so when we look at those microorganisms and we look at that soil, the key is, what do you and I have to do to manage the optimum productivity of those microorganisms? We want to have a pH that's close to neutral. A little bit slightly acidic if possible, and that's going to help to acidify some of the, break some of the bonds of some of that phosphorus that's tied up in the soil. When we look at the soil pH and nutrient availability, here's the chart of the nutrients that we want in with the top 3 macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium on the top. If I look at that chart, when those nutrients are available, it's phosphorus specifically between 6.5 and 7.5. If you get any more acidic than 6.5 or any more basic than 7.5, you're going to start to severely tie up the phosphorus. You may have boatloads of it out there. You may even apply a bunch. But it's going to tie up and your plant will not get it because it can't solubilize in those environments. So managing pH is a huge part of phosphorus management. How does phosphorus get into the plant? Well, first of all, we're going to go out there, we're going to broadcast in the fall, right, or in the early spring. We're going to put 100% of our P out there based off removal recommendations, and we're going to put that into the soil bank. We go out there and we broadcast, that's going into the soil bank, not into the plant. And that first year with phosphorus, you might get up to about 10% of what you apply gets into that plant. That doesn't mean that's all the plant gets. The soil releases. There's 2 things that are feeding the plant: us and the soil. Now, another option would be I'd go out there and I'd put 50% of that phosphorus on through broadcast. I'm going to feed the soil bank. Feeding the soil bank is feeding the microbes. The microbes feed us back. So we don't want to ignore the soil bank. The other 50%, I'm going to band it with the planter. Now, here's part of the key. When I band it with the planter, about 30% of that gets into the plant the first year. I've heard all my life in talking all over the nation how if I buy 1034O, that's more expensive than if I buy MAP or DAP. Wait a second. If there's a 30% return versus a 10% return, which one's more expensive? You see, it never made sense to me. I said, it ain't more expensive, it's cheaper. It's not about the cost, it's about the return. So when we look at broadcast, on this chart on the left-hand side, it's on the up and down axis, this is a fertilizer needed to optimize yield. And on the bottom of that chart, it's the soil nutrient supplying potential. So therefore, on the left-hand side, up against the zero axis, that's very low supplying soil potential, right? It's low organic matter, it's low CEC. Soil doesn't have a lot of nutrient supplying power. On the right-hand side is going to be high organic matter, high CEC, high producing soils of nutrients. And when I compare broadcasting, that's the amount. So as you get into high supplying potential soil, high nutrient supplying soil, you and I don't have to supply as much, right? And so when I compare that to banding, it's significant. You see, the optimum in low producing soils, if you're not banding and you don't have soils that have the ability to produce a lot of N, P, and K, you're probably throwing a lot away by just broadcasting. You're going to get a high return, as much as 50% less needed to hit that optimum yield. And even in my high supplying soils, it's still an advantage. So then we got to dig in and we got to understand, what is CEC? Why do we talk about CEC? CEC is the cation exchange capacity. It's the negative sites on negative charges that clay particles have and organic matter have in the soil. And those negative sites act like a magnet, and they hold on to nutrients, positively charged nutrients in the soil, and they prevent them from just going out the tile line or washing away, right? So the soil CEC is the indicator of how big your bank is, how many nutrients it can hold at any one time. The soil CEC increases as the amount of clay increases, as the amount of organic matter increases. Part of that also is important to understand that you got to have pH balanced or close to neutral if you want a high amount of CEC or a high amount of exchange sites available for those nutrients. As we look at soil moving or nutrients moving from the soil to the plant, let's look at the top 6 inches of the soil in an acre of field. On average, you got about 50,000 pounds of potassium out there. You have about 6,000 pounds of nitrogen, and you have about 3,000 pounds of phosphorus. That's just in the top 6 inches on 1 acre. That's a lot of fertilizer, and we're out there throwing a couple 100 pounds or 100 pounds, okay? And so the thing to understand is this is in that soil bank, but that doesn't mean it's available. You see, we need to understand what's in solution form. That's only what the plant, that's what the plant can take up. When it's in the soil, it's a lot of times tied up in the organic form, the bulk of it. So 0.1 to 2% of that, of those three nutrients, are in solution form. That's a pretty small amount. So as we understand that, we need to understand what influences getting those nutrients from the organic form into solution form for the plant to be able to take up. So nutrient availability is controlled by pH, temperature, moisture, soil microbes, and the CEC, which is basically a combination of your clay and your organic matter. Here's a study done by University of Guelph in Ontario. What they did is they studied the concentration in the leaf tissue of a corn plant of phosphorus. They said for optimum yield, you want to see that concentration to be at 0.4%. So what they did is they took a kernel of corn and they put it into a hydroponic situation where it was in a neutral medium, and they could control the amount of phosphorus that was being supplied to that plant. And they supplied none. So basically this seed, when it started growing, the only phosphorus it had was from the starch of the seed itself. Once it ran out of that, it died. By V4, V5, that plant flatlined. Understand that no living organism on earth can survive without phosphorus, including you and I. Now, then they took that seed and they put it into a high phosphorus testing soil. And you can see as they did tissue samples that it stayed below that 0.4% all the way to V6. Why at V6 all of a sudden did that bar start to climb above 0.4%? Mineralization. About that time, what do you think soil temperatures were, guys? A little warmer than 65 maybe, right? What's happening in the environment at that point? She's lighting up. That's when the environment's going to start feeding us. What do I do about this part from V1 to V6 that I'm nutrient deficient? What's the risk? When we put seed starter on, what happened in that study is they supplied that plant enough phosphorus to carry it through until mineralization took hold. Okay? So every seed that we put in, we're talking about corn here, but you tell me one seed that we can plant as farmers and put in the ground that's not going to have to live off the phosphorus within that seed until the root structure gets big enough to supply it from the environment. Until the environment gets warm enough to start to solubilize for those roots to take up. You see, every plant that we plant deals with the same thing. And so many times deficiencies in phosphorus show up early on. With corn, a lot of times we see it through that V6 period. So that's important to understand. As managers of nutrients, as managers of crops, it's important to understand that corn sets its rows around by V4, right? So if I have a 16-row round and I can increase it to 18-row round on 32,000 ears on average, that's going to add 22 bushel. If I can hold on to rows long, that's set by V6. If I can take those same 32,000 ears in an acre and I can add 1 row long on average, I'm going to add 6 bushel. Here's a starter plot where Aaron and Corey did a few years ago. They had 0 gallon, 3 gallon, 5 gallon, 10 gallon. You can see the plant getting bigger, more robust, darker in color, all of them. As they followed through, they took that to yield. What happened? Well, at 3 gallon, it added 7.8 bushel. There's a lot of us that are putting 3 gallon on in furrow, right? There you go, we're covered. But what happened when they put 10 gallon on? It jumped to 24 bushel. Did they hold on or did they add back? Did they hold on to 2 more rows along? 2 more rows around? Or did they hold on to 4 more rows long on the average of that plot? And so with the FurrowJet planter attachment that we designed, that the R&D team and engineers designed, they focused on 100%. This is a phosphorus placing tool. Phosphorus is a critical part of driving yield early on. And so this tool puts a band right in the furrow after the farmer firms the seed. And then it puts a band 3/4 up, 3/4 over, because the tip of the crown is formed 3/4 of an inch below the surface of the soil. So those second bands up a little bit higher are perfectly placed so that when those crown roots, first and second and third crown roots, early development roots that are going to be deciding what that plant does by V6, are going to be hitting that phosphorus band within a 1/2 inch of development. So the FurrowJet was designed for that optimum placement for the seedling root, the crown roots. If 10 gallon won the plot every year, or 8 to 10 gallon every year for 8 years straight, then I don't want to put that much in furrow. That's a pretty hot mix that's going to risk seed burn, right? So the multi-band gives me the ability to go to a higher volume and not risk the burn. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Aaron Herman, and he's going to go into the next chapter.
Thanks, Doug. During my first week of work here in 2015, my boss, Jason Stoller, pulled me aside into the conference room pictured here. He shut the door behind him and said, "Aaron, what I'm going to tell you is highly confidential. There's many even within this organization that don't know about this project yet." And I was excited. I was excited to finally see behind the curtain of Precision Planting, what were they working on to improve your operation? And that is when, in 2015, Jason Stoller laid out the principles Doug just shared with you. How soil can't provide enough phosphorus early in the season by banding a higher rate of phosphorus, some on the seed, some off the seed, we can increase ROI to the grower. And I was hooked. I was hooked on the concept that we can time and we can place nutrients better to drive yield. And since then, I've been helping our R&D team implement plots, implement research, trying to find the next way or improving the way of managing nutrients. And like Justin said this morning, we've failed. We've done things that haven't worked. And in 2016, we started into researching nitrogen. How can we improve nitrogen management? And today, I hope you walk away with ways you can improve your nutrient management system. And so, but first we have to dive in. We have to lay a foundation of how nitrogen works in the soil. 96% of all nitrogen in the soil is in the organic nitrogen form. Organic nitrogen is nitrogen in residue, microbes, and organic matter. I have a picture of a manure spreader with residue because that's what I think of. Manure is decomposing organic matter. There is other forms in it, and then residue. And there's already 2,000 pounds of nitrogen per 1% of organic matter out there on your farm. So many of us sitting here have thousands of pounds of nitrogen. Why do we apply nitrogen? And it's because it's unavailable to the plant. Plants can't take up residue. Plants can't take up organic matter. It has to be broken down and released into the plant. So what does it have to be broken down to so the plant can get it? Well, all major crops take up the bulk of their nitrogen in nitrate form. Nitrate is NO3 with a negative charge. That negative charge tells us something important. The soil is also a negative charge. The exchange sites of the soil are a negative charge. So nitrate does not connect to the soil. The soil doesn't hold nitrogen. It moves with water. And so if water's moving down in the spring, we can leach it to the tile lines. Another way to lose nitrogen or nitrate is denitrification. Denitrification is when we have a waterlogged soil, the bacteria that don't require oxygen will convert nitrate to a nitrogen gas. So though all major crops take up the bulk of their nitrogen in this form, it is also the most susceptible form of nitrogen. We have to be careful how much nitrate ends up in our soil because it's a risk if the plant's not taking it up. Another form of nitrogen that's plant available is ammonium, NH4 with a positive charge. The positive charge tells us something good. This does connect to our soil. And so it's far less prone to leaching. So when you apply fertilizers, what form of nitrogen are you applying? Let's take anhydrous, for example. Anhydrous is NH3. We put it below the surface. It quickly interacts with water, just like it'll quickly interact with you if it comes in contact with your skin. Well, it does the same thing in the soil. Quickly interacts, becomes ammonium, NH4. Urea goes through a process called hydrolysis, and it becomes ammonium. Now, liquid nitrogen products like 28 and 32%, they are a blend of nitrogen forms. 50% of those products are in the ammonium form, and 50% of those products are in the urea form, 25% of those products are in the ammonium form, and 25% of those products are in the nitrate form. We really like that about those products, that if we apply them in season or near the plant, we already have plant available nitrogen ready to go. We don't have to rely on the soil. We don't have to rely on temperature. When you put 28% in the ground, 25% of that is nitrate ready to go. But let's talk a little bit more about urea and applying the urea portion in 28 and 32%. When we put urea in the ground, we incorporate it. In the soil, it goes through a process called hydrolysis, and it turns into ammonia. Does anybody know what ammonia is? It's the same thing in the white bottles. It's anhydrous. It actually becomes a gas in the soil, connects up with water, and becomes ammonium. If we put our urea or the urea portion in 28 and 32% on the surface, that reaction is the same. It turns into ammonia gas, but because it's not in the soil, we lose it into the atmosphere. This is what we call volatilization. So applying urea to the surface is almost like applying anhydrous ammonia without your applicator in the ground. Very few people know that your urea actually becomes anhydrous before it becomes plant available. And so put urea below the ground, and it's relatively easy to prevent by incorporation, putting it below the ground. We can water it in if we have that capability, or we can pray that it gets watered in. And the last one is we can use a urease inhibitor. Urease is an enzyme that's needed for that conversion to ammonia, and that inhibitor will delay that conversion, and hopefully Mother Nature will get it reined in by the time that inhibitor wears off. So these are the ways we can lose nitrogen that we don't ever get it back. It's gone and it's not coming back into our program. But there's another way that we can lose plant available nitrogen that it does come back, and that is through immobilization. Immobilization is when soil microbes consume plant available nitrogen. They convert it, it becomes a part of them, and in doing that, they're converting it to the organic nitrogen form. Is this lost? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Because later, once some of that residue and carbon's broken down, they'll start breaking down that same organic nitrogen, pull it back into the ammonium form. Immobilization is strong typically early in the season. Mineralization is typically strong later in the season. And then the microbes will also convert ammonium to nitrate. And in doing so, they're taking things like anhydrous ammonia and urea, and they're actually getting it into the nitrate form where the crop is going to take up the bulk of their nitrogen. And these processes are driven by moisture and temperature. Why? Because they're driven by microbes. And so these are a lot of the processes that are happening in your soil. And they are almost all driven by weather. Weather has a huge impact on these processes. And I don't know your experience when we're putting in plots and we're trying to farm. I'm pretty sure the weatherman can't get 3 days right in the forecast. How about 5 months? When we put out anhydrous, do we know what our spring's going to be like? When we put out an all pre-plant broadcast a couple weeks before planter, do we know what our weather's going to be like? And when I look at this graph, this scares me because we have no clue where it's going to end up. See, in a wet and a cool year, your anhydrous might stay in the ammonium form for a long time. And your plant's starving until the soil temperatures kick up and they can get it to nitrate. In a warm year, it could be completely the opposite. You can have plenty of nitrate, maybe too much nitrate that gets leached with the rain event. And so this is why we believe that applying nutrients close to the growing season, close to the crop, or during season eliminates a lot of the risk and eliminates a lot of the risk of this system. So in 2017, we started learning when we apply nitrogen, how much actually gets into the plant and how much goes into all these processes. And we worked with Dr. Mulvaney and Kelsey down at University of Illinois and Tim Smith to use N15 tracer fertilizer to track that nitrogen into the plant. What's N15? N15 is a rare isotope, only occurring in nature 0.37% of the time. All other nitrogen is N14. It's N15, it has a slightly higher atomic weight because it has one extra neutron. But the beauty of N15 is it goes through all the same processes as N14. So it's distinct, but it acts like all the rest of the nitrogen. And so we track it into the plant. And we do that with a few different application methods. We did an incorporated broadcast. How much nitrogen gets into the plant then? Then we did a dribble on top with a drag chain. This is common on some planters. And then 1 inch below the surface, 3 inches away, a conceal placement. And let's look a little bit more about what conceal looks like. So you can see how conceal's tucked in the gauge wheel, a knife running in the ground. The gauge wheel controls the depth, so we get consistent depth below the surface across all topography. You can see we're 3 inches away, even around turns. We like this because we're not hanging attachments off the front or the back. It's tucked in to your current planer system. So we harvested these plots. At the end, we cut off the entire above ground portion of the plant. We dried and ground it and sent it to Dr. Mulvaney and Kelsey, where they used a mass spectrometer to separate the N14 from the N15 based on that slight difference of weight. And I still remember the day we got these results back. Corey called me over to his desk, and I was blown away. And so I want you guys to put a number in your head. How much of your fertilizer nitrogen do you think gets into the plant? We did this for 3 years, and on average, an incorporated broadcast only got 16% of its nitrogen into the above ground portion. Now you're thinking exactly what I'm thinking. Where in the world is the other 84%? Where did it go? Well, we got a few options. It could be the atmosphere through volatilization, but we did incorporate it, so I don't think that's likely. We could have leached it, but that would take some serious weather events to leach 84% of our nitrogen. So I don't think that's an option. So the last option is the soil. Where did it go in the soil? And this is when we realized the power of immobilization. This process is way more powerful than you think. Microbes took the fertilizer we applied and they consumed it as they were breaking down residue. Did it leave? No. Later in the season, they mineralized that back, but that wasn't the exact same nitrogen we applied. Most of that probably came back as N14. So it's not an indicator of how much total nitrogen in the plant, but it is an indicator on that application how much got into the plant. Can we do better? Well, with the concealed dual band, we are able to get 34% into the plant. We can still see the soil still working on it, but that's twice as much into the plant as an incorporated broadcast. Why is that? Why does banding nutrients get more into the plant? Well, it's the power of concentrated. A band is concentrated. The microbes are working on it, but they can't get to all of it. It's too concentrated. And that reserves some for plant uptake. So you think about 28%, I said it had nitrate in it. That's already plant available. The microbes can work on a portion of it, but there's a portion that remains for plant uptake. But if we broadcast it out there, now every microbe has their individual meal, and they lick it up like that. Last treatment, dribble with a drag chain. You can see the banding helped us. The banding did better at getting nutrients into the plant than the incorporated broadcast. But it wasn't as high as dual band conceal. Why is that? Well, we believe because it was on the surface, that urea and ammonium volatilized. That urea had to become an ammonia gas before it became plant available. Because we lost that nitrogen, it was less nitrogen we could get into the plant. And so in this circumstance, we don't believe a drag chain was enough incorporation to prevent that. So a little deeper dive in the data. We did this for 3 years. In one of the years, dribble drag chain did just as good at getting nitrogen in the plant than Conceal. Does anybody have a guess on what happened that 1 year? Absolutely. You're nailing it. Exactly. Rain happened right after planting. It took it in, and we didn't have that volatilization. That convinced us that on the years we didn't have rain, and we saw that we didn't get as much into the plant, that's what was happening. So the corn plant is under attack early in the season. We have a lot of processes working against us. A lot of times our weather's working against us, and we believe Conceal helps preserve nitrogen for the plant through that period. But let's look at some yield data. Let's look at some data to show, does this actually get to the yield? So Jason Webster has done a great job testing a lot of nutrient programs. I'm going to show some of those. First of all, we have a 100% pre-plant broadcast and a 100% Conceal. Now, I'm not the guy that's going to put 100% of my nitrogen program through Conceal. I don't know if you could pay me enough money to fill up every 3 acres, right? So this isn't practical, but it shows that banding is giving a yield increase over broadcast, and I think it's from that beginning of the season. So let's take the pre-plant broadcast and the 100% Conceal, and let's split that and put 50% of those programs on with side dress. First, we see a yield bump from side dress. Why? We have less risk. On years we get a lot of rain, we put a lot up front. There's a lot of weather that happens between when you put it on and when the plant uptakes it, and we're giving it to that entire system. So there's a bump from side dress, and you can see the bump from dual band Conceal over broadcast again. But there's one program, this is a 5-year study, there's one program that has done the best year over year. And that's the 25% pre-plant broadcast, 25% Conceal, and 50% side dress. Now, I don't think the percentage might look different on a lot of different operations. But why these 3 application methods? Well, it meets the uptake curve of the corn crop. And so let's take a look at what that looks like. Percent of total nitrogen taken up by the corn plant is on the left. Across the bottom is the growth stage of the corn. From VE to V6, a corn crop only takes up 12% of the total nitrogen it will all year. And you think, well, that's not that big a deal. Well, we learned from Doug that sets rows around. Right at the end of that, it's setting the length. A corn plant will dial back if it's not taken care of here. And the soil's working against us. The soil's breaking down residue during this time, so it's pulling nitrogen away from us. And so we believe that planter nitrogen with Conceal is what takes care of the crop during this time. Then we go V6 to V8. At V8, we hit what we call rapid uptake. Rapid uptake is 7 pounds per acre daily of nitrogen. Over 50% of your nitrogen program's taken up in just 3 weeks. So we better have enough nitrogen out there for it. And we believe that's timed well with a side dress with a coulter. We get out there, V3, V5, there's a lot of plant available nitrogen already in the liquid form. And by the time we hit rapid uptake, we got a good chunk of our fertilizer out there ready for it to be taken up. Why with a coulter? Well, we want it to below the surface to keep us from volatilizing. And from VT through grain fill, the last 25% is taken up. And this is a period of strong soil nitrogen supply. And actually, probably some of the rapid uptake curve. where the temperatures have warmed up, where some of the residue's been breaking down. Now the microbes are working on the organic nitrogen, and they're giving us back nutrients. And so though applied before we even plant, a little bit of pre-plant broadcast can actually help this. Because when we feed the microbes, they break down residue faster. Residue with nitrogen on it breaks down way faster than residue without nitrogen on it. So since they break down the residue faster, later in the season, they get to the point where they're mineralizing nitrogen quicker. And we like how it engages the whole soil profile. At the end of the season, we want that whole soil profile kicked up, ready to go. So how do you jump in? How do you jump into improving your nutrient management program? Well, I was thinking about this, and I'm like, there's one style of doing it, and that is Doug Wiegand style. This is Doug Wiegand style of jumping into about anything. Head first, right? Not to mention, I'm not the farmer that would want to have 100% of their nitrogen out there after this rain event, right? There's some serious denitrification and leaching going on right now. But we think you don't even have to be that bold to jump into this program. It's a nutrient program shift. Take some of your pre-plant broadcast and move it to the planter. Take some of your anhydrous, move it to the planter. Move nitrogen to planter to take care of that corn crop early in the season. Take some of your fall recommendation. A lot of us get a recommendation that says how many pounds of phosphorus that they think we should apply on our acres. Take a portion of that and put it through FurrowJet. It typically ends up to be somewhere between 25 and 30% of that portion, 8 to 10 gallons. And then the last thing is shift your soil test target to account for banding phosphorus. Almost all the university recs are built on 100% broadcast programs. And because of that, we think the soil test recommendations are overinflated. And there are University of Minnesota is one of them that gives recommendations on how we don't quite need as high as soil test levels if we're banding phosphorus. We still need good soil test levels, but they look different. And why do we need good soil test levels? Well, that's because at the end of the season, what takes care of the plant? The entire soil. The entire soil is giving us phosphorus. So we did these three things starting in 2017. We tested what it looks like when a grower shifts their nutrient program. And we did it across 3 fields for 5 years. The first field was Irish. So you can see with the hybrid map, our treatments out here, this is probably one of the easiest places to grow corn in the world. Flat, black, and beautiful. Great soil test levels. Does the nutrient program shift work here? The second field's Ackerman South 19. Hadn't been fertilized for 25 years. Very low soil test levels. And you can see we've got a lot of treatments out in this field. We like this field. This field provides a lot of valuable research. But in these treatments is that nutrient program shift. And then our last field, Terhune, is highly variable. We go from a sandbox sand at the north, which you can see on this OM map, then to a sandy loam in the middle, all the way down to high organic matter bottom. About 2/3 of this is irrigated, the other portion is not. And we like this because we can see across the wide variety of soil types, does that nutrient program work in all these scenarios? And we come in and we lay our treatments over this. This is the net dollar advantage per year from 2017 to 2021. And you can see we start on the left, black soil, so those are our Irish South 19 fields. Black soil, low soil test is our South 19 field where we haven't done anything with the soil test. And then all our Terhune zones. And what I like to see as I'm analyzing data is consistency of return. Can we take principles across a lot of different environments? And we get an average of $59 per acre. But we're not farming in 2017, and we're not farming in 2020. We're farming in 2023, where we have almost double the fertilizer prices, almost double the grain prices. And so I didn't feel like this was representative of the opportunity today. So I went back through the data, applied current grain prices, current fertilizer prices, and watched these numbers go up. I've crunched a lot of data on nutrient management, and there is not a better opportunity to focusing on it and improving it than now. Our lowest return in all these scenarios was $66. Our highest, $165 for an average of $112 an acre. Since I've crunched this data, there hasn't been a better time. But I believe the most difficult thing is the decision to act. That's the most difficult thing between you and a better nutrient program. Because we have the tools to apply it and time it correctly. We have the tools to control it correctly, to make sure every row, every acre gets the same amount, or prescription control, where we're managing the amount of fertilizer based on what the soil's supplying. We have a dealer network and advisors in your region that know your scenario. I'm not a believer in one size fits all. And so we have people that can adjust it and tweak it and make it work on your operation in your region. And I believe the decision to act, the decision to improve your nutrient program will set your farm up for the future, increase your profits, and reduce your risk on your operation. Thank you. Time's up, but does anybody have time for questions? Me and Doug can probably take a few questions here.